All right, I'm here with Johanna McBrien. Thank you so much for being back
You're welcome. Thank you for
and
asking me.
checking in 10 years later. I just looked. So that
Can't
was
believe it.
10 years flew by. And
Well, we've known each other for a lot longer than that, but the
I
last time
know.
I was on your recording, it was 10 years ago,
Yeah,
2015.
that's right. I mean, I remember when I do believe that when we very first met, I had a piece of New Hampshire furniture at my auction, and you showed up with Brock Job, and you
Hmm.
were there making notes, taking measurements, all that
Yeah,
stuff. That's when we first met.
many
It
moons
was,
ago. That was for the Masterwork of Portsmouth Furniture book and exhibition. Yeah, that was a lot of fun. We went everywhere. I met a lot of people, a lot of great people through that. So I
oh, I
appreciate
love
that
that.
opportunity.
I love that book. I
Yeah.
have that book, and that's one of my favorite
And then they
books.
had the anniversary at the historical society in Portsmouth recently. I mean, not recently. That was probably 5 years ago at this point.
I
Where did it
know.
go?
It's flying by.
Jerry
Yeah.
Ward put that book together, and I gave a little presentation actually on Langley Boardman, who was one of the cabinet makers
Oh, yeah.
about whom I wrote for the book, and he was also one of my thesis. The focus of my thesis was Samuel Dockman. They were both cabinet makers in Portsmouth, and the I had actually discovered where he trained and whom he trained.
Hmm.
And so
Wow.
I gave a talk there as part of the series of the anniversary. And unfortunately, it'll never be published, so it'll, I guess, just go die with me. But and those who
Oh,
were at the session. So, but yeah, I traced him back to Salem and to where he worked. It was a lot of fun.
now, as far as these things used to seem like they mattered so much more,
Hmm.
and years ago, like when people really into, like, for instance, it was a wonderful uh opportunity to own a really nice piece of Portsmouth furniture. And I loved those little drop apron, panel bow front chests, and with
Yeah.
the beautiful satin wood, and matched mahogany veneers and all that. And
Mhm.
does that still exist? I mean, I know things are selling for a fraction, but are there still people that want this type of furniture?
I would certainly hope so. Again, I'm not in the. When we spoke last 10 years ago, I was the founding editor of Antiques and Fine Art magazine, which now no longer survives. Now it's In Collect magazine.
Oh, okay.
That's why I stayed with it for so long. I was there for 20 something years because I knew that once I left, its focus would shift. And I wanted to stay as long as I could to provide a forum for people, for scholars to publish material. And so I was very in tune, with who was buying and whatnot at that point. And I've been here at Dedham Museum and Archive in Dedham, Mass. for 7 years. This June, actually.
Hmm.
And so I don't go to the auctions like I used to, but I still do attend antique shows. And there's
Hmm.
certainly still Portsmouth furniture that I do find, when I go through the antique shows, particularly the New Hampshire Antique Dealer Show and the Manchester, New Hampshire shows, and the other
Hmm.
shows that are up there, Deerfield, etc. So it's definitely still out there. And there's definitely interest. People say there's no interest in Brownwood anymore. I don't agree with that. I think it's just been a market adjustment because things have gotten so high in price that the average person couldn't afford it,
That's correct. Yeah.
especially younger
Hmm.
people. Because I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but when most people don't seriously collect, at least in the last several decades, until they get a little older because they have house to pay off, college to pay off, themselves and their kids, so they don't have the resources to seriously buy something in the 5 digit plus category.
Hmm.
So a lot of smalls, we find a lot of smalls are purchased. A lot of people start off with smalls because that's what you can afford, and you can add little accents with smalls. And people, there was for a long time a big push with modernism, and
Yep.
that's now not as big as it was for a while. The gray and the black and the white and everything sleek and whatnot. Then there became more interest in what's the term? It's basically uh, maximalism instead of minimalism.
Ah,
And
yep.
so, lots of textures and colors and patterns in a space.
Mm.
And oftentimes there'll be like an accent piece one nice, really nice piece, and then smalls.
Yeah.
associated with that, because again, first of all, it's a living comfortable, it's the comfortable living aesthetic that I think is also changed. Most people don't live in formal houses like museum houses anymore. They don't live in a formal side dining room, for example, with a sideboard
Yeah.
laid out. That's why silver isn't as popular as it used to be, because
Yeah.
people don't do that anymore. China, forget about it. I mean, people just can't give it away. You know that from, I'm sure, from being in the auctions.
Yeah.
Because people don't have these multi-course meals anymore. So culture is changing, and as culture changes, the interest as far as what people want to live with. And again, living in a formal setting isn't what many people feel is comfortable. So that's why this shift towards more, and then you get the modernism, which is again cool and whatnot. It's still, you still see it in the designer decorator books. It's still chic, but the comfort aspect of the textiles and the patterns and the stuff is also now a part of it. And again, I think the accents play a large part, especially with people who are not able to spend 1,000 or more on something, even though an accent piece can be, or a small can be that much too. And when I go to a show, I tend to buy things. In fact, I saw Clayton Pennington of Man Antique Digest at the last year at the New Hampshire Antique Show, and he and Lita. No, it was actually New York in January. I hadn't been in there in 5 years, but I decided, okay, so I should go down. And I saw Clayton and Lita Swells Cohen. She's amazing. She's in her 90s. God bless her. And they were like, "Oh, we should do an article on you. What you collect?" And it's like, well, I wouldn't say I'm a collector. Certainly, I mean, it's things that I enjoy. So it's nothing exceedingly expensive at all. Trust me. But there are things that I enjoy, like smalls. And when I go to the antique shows, at least the New Hampshire show, that's the one I can afford things at. I'll buy things that are just smalls. Like a little miniature bench, or a pewter shoe, or just tiny little things that are just fun little accents, because they make me happy. And that's, I think, what the important thing is you want to look at something and you want to make you happy. And you should never buy for investment. That's right. That's like buying 101. Do not buy for investment, because you don't know what's going to happen in the market. You don't know how interests are going to change. And so buy what you love.
Buy what you love, because you're living with it.
You're living with it, exactly.
That's what I've told people many times over the years when they ask, what should I invest in? Because, we all, as they say as dealers, we all live with our mistakes too. That's another thing, as they say. But I think, the trends are funny when you think about them. But I remember, you think about, I know you're a furniture lover. You love nice period American furniture. And it
doesn't mean I own any, but I appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, like you think of like Goddard Townsend, or a really nice Boston piece.
Oh God, yeah.
I mean, they're just wonderful. And you would hope that market. I remember that Albert Sack bid for the Brown. I want to say the Brown Secretary at $12 million. And at the time, it was a young couple that bought that. Those. I don't think that would happen today.
And it would be unusual to put it that way. And actually, my cousin Alan Breed made the reproduction for the Brown.
I didn't know he was your cousin.
Yeah,
I've known related. Alan since I was a kid. Alan is awesome. Yeah, I did a podcast with him.
Oh, that's great. Good. Yeah, he's a great guy. So talented. He made the copy for the.
That's right.
Brown family could still have the have it, but you bring up an interesting design point. Is that to me, classic design is classic design. It doesn't matter when it was made. So it can be from the Goddard and Townsend time. It can be from the 1960s. If it's great design, it's great design, and they work together. And that's what people are doing more too. They're meshing time periods. As long as the design works, it doesn't matter when it was made. So
that's why you
can have fun when you collect. You can buy from different time periods, as long as they work together. Have fun with it. You don't have to follow this guide of what am I collecting? Am I doing it the right way? Follow your gut, follow your heart, and if something sings to you, then bam, that's the way to go. And if I could collect anything seriously, again, if I win the lottery, I certainly will. It would be actually Salem, Massachusetts, from the 1770s-ish time period, because you have that Newport gracefulness, but it's even better, and the wood is so dense and heavy and beautiful mahogany, and there's just that gorgeous line, that Hogarth curve, and the carving of the shaping of
McIntyre. Listen,
No,
was
no, McIntyre actually. McIntyre's a little later.
McIntyre, was he later? Yeah.
He was later.
Right.
But this is smack dab in the middle of the 18th century, and it's just such a little later, mid to late 18th century. It's just a gorgeous, but it's simple. It's simple beauty, just like Hogarth had said. The simple beauty, and that's what I look for. It's just, and that's what I appreciate when I go to a museum or I go to an antique show. I'm drawn to that simple beauty, and I like funky things too. But it's again, classic design is classic design. Doesn't matter what time. Look at fashion, women's fashion, for example. They cycle back around. The hemlines, or whatever it is. Even men's ties. The thin, the thick, the skinny. I mean, just nothing's new. It just kind of gets added on. I think Steve Jobs, although he was not the first one to say this, basically said, how he came, why he was successful is he took other people's ideas and made them better.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of funny. You think about, we talked earlier about sort of the federal era designs, Hepplewhite, the Chippendale, and all that, how they, Sheraton, how it seemed like every 20 years it'd be a revival of that as you go along. It seemed like about every 20 years. Yeah. And, starting from the Centennial, exhibition, you used to be much more involved in auctions than you are these days. But I wanted to ask you, since you and I have talked, we had this little thing called the pandemic, and that kind of changed everything for a while. I remember I didn't know what I was going to do when that first happened. I knew I couldn't do appraisals anymore. I couldn't, be involved in auctions anymore for a while. But I did a very interesting podcast with 3 different auction companies during the pandemic. And I remember Wes, I'm trying to think of Wes and
Cowan?
yes,
Cowan?
Wes Cowan said, a collector has to collect, they'll figure it out. And I really thought that was really a great saying, because they did. I mean, look at the group shops when they started opening up, they were flooded with people buying. Everyone that I knew that owned a group shop was doing really well. Eventually auctions came back. And what I thought was going to happen was, I thought it would be like a dam breaking, like there'd be so much flooded into the market. And it kind of happened, that it would change everything. I look at my friend John McGinnis, for instance, and he's still backed up, like a year worth of merchandise here and there and all over the place, ready to sell all the time. So we're kind of force feeding. I had a conversation with John, I don't know, not that long ago, and he said, buyers is what I need. I need buyers. Get me buyers, not sellers. So
right.
I mean, but we made it through the pandemic. We're still going. Things, it depends on what it is. Some things seem to be holding really well. Some things, it's a hit or miss. I think you could have something in 3 different auctions and get 3 different extremes. I mean, these things are possible. And
so much of it is location, where you sell a collection. And oftentimes collections have a lot of material, and some things are going to do better in one place, and other things would have done better had they gone somewhere else. But a family just wants to, move it along, so everything goes to one location, and that's always been an issue. But and then you have other things like the scrimshaw issues, which have unfortunately impacted antiques dealers and collectors. I mean, think of people who
talk a little bit, expand on that a little bit. There was the Endangered Species Act of 1973, but it's been really heavily enforced, and now you need a certificate of some kind, right, when you go to sell?
I believe so.
Yeah. Which is costly.
It's costly, but also a lot of historic objects have been destroyed because of it. And unfortunately, I actually spoke at the State House here in Boston with other people in the field when there were bills in Massachusetts related to the Endangered Species Act. And I'm all for saving elephants. Absolutely.
Me too. Yeah.
But you can't, but things that were made hundreds of years ago, you can't put those in the same pot as things that are being done today. Elephants being poached and killed for their tusks and all that. That's, yes, of course they were back then as well, but it's you can't put them in the same basket. And of
Hmm.
course, we want bills that save the elephants and that prevent, poaching and all these horrible things that are happening now. But that doesn't mean you punish the artifacts and the history. And there's a great portrait miniature. Sorry, somebody just rang the bell. Of John Ravage, by John Ravage, I believe.
And it's on ivory.
Of George Washington on ivory. So
Yeah.
are you going to destroy that because it's on ivory? I mean, seriously, it's part of history. It's just crazy.
So these things, like you're saying, they're not like being destroyed, are they? I mean,
well, some, from what I understand, are being uh, disposed of, or seized, and so it is a serious issue with antiques, because and it's difficult to tell whether something is elephant ivory or if it's uh, walrus tusk or whatnot. If you have the tooth, you can tell the difference. But if it's,
well, there's also the IRS, as far as fair market and as far as estate tax purposes. If you have, say, Asian ivory, that's not even, whenever it's made, you have to appraise it as if you could sell it when you're appraising for the IRS.
right.
But even though you can't sell it, you have to appraise it as if you can. So,
yeah.
It's a tough situation. When I come across people that say, "What do I do with this?" I say, "Well, I don't even know if you can donate it." I've been telling people if they could, but I don't even know if that's another issue.
That I can't give you an answer. We haven't had that issue at the museum, so I can't. If somebody offers us something, then we'd have to look into that, but I don't know actually.
Yeah.
What are museum collections? Hopefully they won't, be damaged. But yeah, it's a changing, it's always a changing landscape. It's just, and again, that's the reason why you buy what you love and don't buy for investment.
Yeah.
So you live with it and you appreciate it and you love what you have and don't plan to, I'll sell. This is going to be my retirement fund and I'll sell it, 20 years down the road, because you never know what the interests are going to be or what the laws are going to be, for this. So that's why it's really critical to have that your heart sing. And if your heart doesn't sing when you see things, then you shouldn't be collecting. But as you pointed out, with the pandemic, true collectors, they're always looking for, it's a need, it's a
obsession.
a desire, it's an obsession. And when I worked with Wayne Pratt Antiques, this is back in the early 90s, no, mid 90s, I can't remember at this point. Late 90s. He was a consummate. He just had to sell things. He couldn't hold on to anything.
Yeah.
He didn't want to. He first of all, he didn't want to deny his best clients, the best stuff by holding it himself. He loved selling things, and so I remember one story he told me. He was sitting back in his chair with his desk, his feet up on the desk, saying, "Okay, Johanna, I finally got this chair back." I said, he said, when I was 12 years old, I sold this Windsor chair. It is the best Windsor I have ever seen. And his specialty was Windsors, Nantucket baskets, block front chests, Cahoon paintings, etc. And he said, "This is the best Windsor chair. And I promised myself if I ever got it back, this is the one thing I would keep." The next day, it was sold. He
just couldn't do it.
He couldn't not sell. So,
oh my God,
that was funny. His passion. He loved collecting, so and selling. And he had the collectors who loved to collect. And so it was that's why people go into the business. They love the material and they love to sell and place things in the right places, right locations. So anyway.
Well, I remember he bought at the Bartlett auction that I had in 1989. He bought the apothecary chest, and I had what I did was I had to move that thing. It was full of the drugs, original, all the way through, including a whole drawer full of lead pills that they used to prescribe. So I had all the drugs. I had one of my helpers at the time take each one out, label it in a bag, and put everything in a bag. So we had all these, like, I don't know how many drawers there were. There was like 50, 60 drawers, maybe even more.
I remember that.
Yeah. And Wayne bought that at the time. And that was just a beautiful piece. and for some reason the state of New Hampshire didn't want it when they bought the other pieces. But yeah, that was incredible. But I remember dealing. That was the only time. I mean, I had talked to Wayne before, different times, but that was like the first one-on-one dealing I had on him directly with that. And he was. I just said, "Oh my God, this guy's funny. He's a character."
Yeah, he really is. I should say was he his mind was like a steel trap. He had like Ron Bourgeot, the memory, every deal, every person, every contact, every whatever, it was there. He had one of these great eyes where he would just remember every object where he'd seen it before, and Ron Bourgeot's the same way, and he really knew his stuff, and he was a really, actually most people don't realize that he was a very giving, caring, funny, generous person, to those who worked with him, and but he didn't show that publicly in the same way. So, but he did. He had a great sense of humor.
Yeah.
And that was
great. And I think that's funny. I used to say that I remember things, not names. Like if I would see a person and they would have me in their house, I remember, well, they had a Simon Willard clock over their mantle or whatever it was, like I remember those type of things. And when I run into them again, I'd say, "Oh, hey, do you still have that clock?" But I couldn't remember their name, so that that didn't help.
Yeah, no, I'm there with you. It's true. It's fun.
Yeah.
What are you
But
gonna do?
I mean, when we see something exciting, I mean, here's the thing: we can talk about again, the appreciation that I have, and I know you have tenfold of what I have, is how wonderful these pieces of furniture were made with the tools that they had to make them with, and the lighting and everything you can imagine, and the apprentices working, and just how they made such perfection on some of these pieces. And they're like a piece of artwork, some of these pieces of furniture. And the drawers still work perfectly. And I mean, it's just amazing. And I remember your cousin Alan Breed told me when he was making that copy that there were some things he just couldn't understand how they could have done with the tools they had at the time. There were all these little trick things, and that trick doors or something that he just said it was just amazing.
The latches underneath, you have to press something and the whole center comes. And the amazing thing about it is that they weren't taking their time. I mean, they had to make money too, so they were long. I mean, they had assembly. Even though it was different from you get into the fancy chairs and whatnot, where things literally are pieces, then assembly lines later on. But even in a cabinet shop, you'd have somebody make dovetails, blah blah blah. But they weren't just there. In fact, Alan, he I remember having a conversation with him once where he had several, let's say 6. Portsmouth Gaines chair type crest to carve to recreate, and he said the first one took a bit for him to kind of get into the groove, but then once he started moving along, he just knocked them out, because you got into a rhythm, and you were on the clock, you wanted to make money. So even though yes, these things still survive, and yes, it's amazing how some of them are made, but they weren't like being artistes. They were doing the job and that had to be done, and but there was craftsmanship, versus just whipping it together and we're out of here, on to the next one. There was definitely a craftsmanship involved, because it was your reputation too. You'd want that. I was actually there's a Lost Art Books, I think it is, not to plug somebody's business, but he just reproduced French 17th or 18th century books on tools and workmanship. And if I was still in that field in the same way, I'd buy it in a heartbeat, because it's been translated also, so it's not in the original French version. But things like that. I mean, I look at my bookcase. I mean, I have my bookcases at home, and that's where I put so much focus, is collecting these great books through the years. But
and how did the designs? A lot of them originated. You think of like Hepplewhite or Sheraton. in England, and yet the design comes over to America all in about the same time. And was that through publications,
It
or
came
how did
over.
that?
It was the publications. It was for from imported furniture and also from craftsmen. So
Oh,
you
the
get
craftsman came
coming
over.
over. So they
Yeah.
bring their knowledge and their skills. Actually, at where I am now, the Dedham Museum and Archive, we have furniture from the 17th century, 1630s time period, and it's it's attributed to a craftsman who was in England and trained there, and about 10 miles away from where he lived. His name is John Thurston. There was a pulpit and carvings that match what's on this chair, for example. And Robert St. George was the first one to write about this, or an earlier person to write about this in his book, his book on 17th century craft. And this is the oldest dated piece of furniture in America. So it's an extraordinary piece. It's a great chair. And there are earlier pieces made down in Plymouth, but this was the oldest dated piece in 1652. And but you can see, his carving. He came over and he brought what he knew in England, and made the furniture in the same manner as he made it in England. Then he trained another fellow who came over at a younger age, at about 14. His name was John Houghton, and you can see the similarities. We have a John Thurston. He was again the master, as they were called at the time. We have that chair, the great chair, and we have a chest that we bought actually at Sotheby's in 2019. That's attributed to him. And then we have a matching chest, 3-panel carved chest that's made by the fellow, his apprentice, whom he trained here, John Houghton, that was actually owned by the Fairbanks family. And the Fairbanks house here in Dedham is the oldest timber frame house in North America. It's extraordinary.
Wow.
North America, so not just the U.S. and Canada. Wow. And then Houghton also made, again, the apprentice also made a matching, or a great chair that has the same lozenge in the back panel, which is the diamond shaped, similar shaped crest, et cetera, et cetera. And the 3-panel chests are almost identical, even the way they're made, with the interlacing bottom boards. And so, as far as I know, we're the only museum that has, from the 17th century, matching master apprentice forms. It's really very cool. But the point is, yeah, it was right. And Thurston, who was again the master, also was one of the builders of the Fairbanks house, and he also built the first school and meeting house. And Dedham is the first community in the colonies, at least in New England, where the public voted for a tax-supported public school. So that's very cool. In 1640s. So anyway, so he was very involved in the town. But the point being, back to your question, he came over from England, and we can trace exactly, we know where he lived, but then within 10 miles, there's this carving that matches what's on this chair. And so that's the fastest way that the styles would get, introduced, and not just in the 17th century. That continues, through the 18th century, et cetera, on. But again, once you get the pattern books, like the Hepplewhite and Sheridan's pattern books, or Sheridan and Hepplewhite's books, that's also, that's where you get more of a extended similarities, because they're following. Chippendale's book wasn't as earlier in the 18th century, it wasn't as distributed as widely. And there were other pattern books as well. His was not the only one. Chippendale's was not the only one in the 18th century.
Conversely,
you also have cabinet makers producing their own books and their own pricing and whatnot. Whittertor has some examples of that, for example.
Wow. Yeah. What a great museum that is.
So I was lucky to go there. It really was. It was like a kid in a candy shop. And at that point, we were able to go in as students on our own. We'd go to the collection and we could handle things. And it was just, it was unreal. I actually went, Frank Levy was, I believe Antiques was a year behind me. And he and I would go into the collection together. And we'd take opposite views of something. I'd say it's right, and he'd say it's wrong. And so we'd try to prove each other. It was actually
that sounds fun.
That was a lot of fun. And Bob Trent, Robert Trent, was there at the time, and he's a genius. And so it was really wonderful to go through and learn from Bob as well.
Right. Oh yeah, that's the thing about learning and passing down all that. And everything's online now. It's so, I tell people when they want to learn. You
You know,
got to
you got
go talk to people if you can, you know?
right. And people, you know, it is a concern. You know, who's learning, you know, for the next generation, who's teaching for the
Right.
next generation, where are people learning information? I mean, literature, of course, still is there. When I was there, I also took classes in the conservation department so that I could, you know, see that side of it. And then when I was at Christie's, I'd hang out with Alan Miller, the cabinet maker, and just, you know, he'd show me about tool marks, and we'd talk about, you know, all sorts of things that we'd see there. So, I mean, you have to ask. You need mentors. You know, going through life,
Yes.
like whatever you do, having people that you can trust and that want to teach you and that
Yeah.
are and want to share so that others learn. I mean, there's some people that are like, oh no, I'm not going to tell you anything. It's all
That's
mine.
right. They think that their knowledge is power. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the best, right, the best thing you can do is to share, because that's how you learn things. I mean, look at the early books. Look, Vincent Lockwood and Wallace Nutting. People will go, oh, poo, poo, poo.
Yeah.
No, somebody had to be out there first.
Yeah.
I mean, you know,
Yeah.
and look at the contributions they made. And then others built on that, you know, and some of it has been disproven, and others are like, yeah, what a great example, you know. So it's appreciating, but again, it's that knowledge and you know, having people who really know what they're looking at. It's
Yeah.
yeah, you hope it continues.
I know. I wish you could download someone's brain sometimes, and some of
I
these
know. I think
these
that
people.
about several people, you know, a number of people I know. It's like I wish there was like a download button.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
save all
I
this
know.
information. You know,
Right.
it's really great.
Yeah. So getting back to the influences, it just made me think of someone in particular. And I'm wondering if you even know the answer to this question, but you think of like an American 18th century cabinet maker that had his own, you know, design. And I think of Duncan Fife, for instance. And I wonder if Duncan Fife ever influenced anyone in England to, you know, design like him, because you do see well, a lot of times they're you know, George the Third, they call them, you know, double pedestal tables that do have a similarity to Duncan Fife's design, but I don't know. I don't know if that ever went that way.
I would think more came over here, but again,
Yeah.
I'm not a Fife expert, so I wouldn't dare to make a proclamation one way or the other. But I would tend to think that I mean, on Lanoue, also, I mean, he was from the French perspective, he was also bringing design over here.
Mhm.
Yeah, but I as far as Fife, I mean, I know his work, but I wouldn't be able to. I don't know historically the transfer, and that's a time that's a little later than my specialty, and it's also New York, which again isn't my
Yeah.
wick. But yeah, I mean, the whole transfer and sharing of information, and people. I actually taught a class down at the Rhode Island School of Design years ago, and I was Cheryl Robertson, who was teaching the class, was taking a sabbatical. She asked if I'd to fill in for her. So it was a history of furniture class. And so you start with Egypt, at least that's where I started, and went, you know, to today.
Wow.
And a lot to cover, no question. And these were these students, again, no offense to students at RISD, but they had an attitude. It was a required course, and they felt that they knew everything, and they just wanted to make what they wanted to make. And so I used to teach also at the Boston Architectural Center, which is now the Boston Architectural College. And that was different. Those were people who wanted to take the class. It was you know, after ed, whatever that's called, after, you know, continuing ed. And so they wanted to be there. So it was a quite difference. But anyway, so I'd go around and I'd ask, you know, what are your interests? What do you want to get out of the class? Blah, blah. And they were all like, you know, they have the hats halfway down. And I said, well, I only care. You know, one kid said, student said, well, I only care about, you know, contemporary stuff. I said, well, we're getting to modern and contemporary the last two classes, and before that you'll you'll be able to see the context of where that came from, et cetera, et cetera. He's like, well, I only care about modern and contemporary. And I said, well, those are the last two classes. And I kind of repeated myself, and he said to me, well, then those are the only classes I'm going to come to. And I said, then you're going to fail the course. Next. I mean, but it was that attitude of, I don't need to know anything else, which is total. I mean, I hope the student has learned since then that context within anything, regardless of what you're talking about, is critical to understanding.
Mm.
And if you're going to look at, again, design, well, what came before it? It's like anything. It's like history. You know, history, you know, repeats itself. And whether you want to accept that or not, it does. not in the same exact ways, but the same concepts. And so does design. And so, yeah, I mean, everybody is sharing from everybody else, learning from everybody else, and interpreting in their own, putting their own swing on it. That's why even somebody who comes from England in the 17th century, who makes this piece of furniture, he's going to introduce something locally. The local craftsman is, oh, I saw that, because creative people, they're always looking, they're creative.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're always looking for new inspiration and the nature, or, what a competitor's doing.
Right. And yeah, I love that. And I do think it's very, very important. We have to pass the torch. And here's just a couple of thoughts on that. I mean, we're only caregivers to what we have here just for the
Right.
time we're here.
Absolutely.
And, I mean, it's important that these things get passed on in good hands, caring hands. And I do have some fear of that. But I also, I heard someone's perspective on why there's a little bit of separation in the way it used to be. And I think there's a lot of truth to it. And I'm just going to run it by you what this person told me. He basically used a Limo's chocolate set, let's just say. It became in the 70s and 80s, all of a sudden it became collectible and costly. But the reason it became collectible is because the person at the time remembered their grandmother serving them hot cocoa through this chocolate set. And now it's put in a cabinet. It's expensive. You can't touch it. And so it loses that connection, the family connection and the ephemeral connection at the time when you're a child to look back to. So now the old saying, if it loses its story, it loses its value, that type of thing. So, so what do you think about that? I mean, do you think, and we also were in a place right now where you click on something. It used to be where you had all these stories. I still have stories. I go to Facebook Marketplace. I got this Spanish circle of old master painting, through Facebook. Terrible frame, I know. But anyway, but I love the chase. And I think that's gone a lot when all you have to do is click on something and you're not, running it down. And
I think in a lot of ways, people are lacking in patience. And because everything is just instant, they can get it. And so they don't want to wait. They want it now. And I think that's kind of a lost, I'll call it an art. And I'm not saying that I doesn't happen to me too, but I try to keep that in mind, that appreciate the process. We have third graders come through the museum every spring, in fact, pretty soon. And one of the sessions we have 3 different stations, and one of which is the one I run. It's the then and now, and it's giving them opportunity to handle original material, even if it's a 1960s telephone, dial-up, rotary telephone. And I make the connection with the phone, and we start with the candlestick phone. We kind of work up, and then with I start with I'm going to blank on the name of this, stereograph.
Oh yeah.
Put the cards in, and your eyes come together, and you see the image in 3D. And so I start with those things, and can I work up to the present? I merge them in an iPhone of today. It has both so
that's
3D
right.
glass, so 3D, when you go to a movie next and have 3D glasses, think of this, but also the whole concept of the visual, the photographs, and the phone. Look at me with the phone. So again, we also have several candle molds, and I talk about candle making and spoons that somebody obviously carved on their own. The other one they bought from a store from the 19th, early 20th century, and just talking about the process and how long things took. You couldn't just run to a store and buy something. You had to you bartered for it, you made it, whatever. And again, it's that patience and appreciation that things took time. They weren't instant and instantaneous, and that is something I think is important to remind students about, because they don't know, because everything is so instant.
Right.
I want something, just run to the store and get it, or I want ordered.
Or Amazon, it's here tomorrow.
Whatever, and so I think that's something which, with history, I think again taking a step back and appreciation is important. Taking a step back and appreciating things from the past, and that includes, using things from the past.
Right.
Use that chest of drawers, open that every time, and smell that great wood.
They're made to be used.
They're made to be used.
Yep.
I think glass and ceramics are a little more iffy because they can break, but same token, there's so many sets of china out there now that you wouldn't want to break it, but so use it, appreciate it. Be careful hand washing it. Break it, drop in the sink. But I think things, as you say, the stories are what make an object important. Even though if you're going to go back to the auctions or dealers, if you're just because George Washington sat in a chair doesn't make it a great looking chair. It could still be an ugly chair. And so just because you've got that provenance doesn't mean it's going to sell for a lot of money, but it's a nice story. So there's still a story connected to it, even if it's not worth a lot of money. So it doesn't have to be worth a lot of money to have a story. It can be a little trinket. It can have a fun story about my grandmother or grandfather or cousin, whatever, uncle, aunt, brought this from XYZ time, or they made this, or they played with this, or whatever.
Yeah.
It just makes it, life is stories. That's what our lives are. That's what a museum does. They tell stories, and they're historically based, of course, but it's the stories of people's lives, and people's lives don't really, the basic needs don't change, and the situations don't really change on the broad scope of things. But it's again those stories and what they, how their life was when they before automobiles or whatever happens to be. I mean, it's those stories that make history so interesting and so much fun and so relevant to our lives, today. And that's why if you're going to do history, you got to be a storyteller. If you're going to sell, antiques, being a storyteller adds a lot to it. And it's we all want to sit and listen to a good storyteller. And my younger brother is an amazing storyteller. He has that personality, just tells great stories. I'm not in that same category. I'm more like, this happened then, but I still, whatever. But it's still the stories. That's
right.
What makes it all go around. And that's what we enjoyed. We go to a family dinner and we tell stories. I always used to love hearing my uncle, tell stories about, XYZ.
That's
it's
all the human connection. I got to tell you the funny story that happened to me. I was out when I was in California, I was at Walnut Creek. It's an area, and I was at a garden club and doing an appraisal clinic for a benefit for the garden club. And there was a big line, and they knew I was like the old antique type of guy. Like I could do like the real antiques, and then they'd have like the modern. And so this woman came up to me and she says, there's a woman standing back in the back of the line, but I want to bring her right up to you because she has an eagle that belonged to George Washington. Mm-hmm. And so I'm kind of like chuckling, and I said, okay, all right. So so she comes, they bring her up to the front of the line, and she unwraps this thing very carefully, whatever, and she puts out the most beautiful Bellamy 2-foot eagle you could imagine. Wow. And I said, well, I got good news and bad news for you. I said, first of all, George Washington was dead for about 150 years when this thing was carved, but it was her family history. You know how that can happen. Like it came down through, like George Washington might have stayed at their house one time or in their family or something, whatever. But anyway, I said, you still have a very valuable eagle made in Kittery Point, Maine. And, it was just, it was really funny, but you hear these, I love the stories, even though they're wrong, to hear when people have these type
of. Sometimes it crushes them, but at the same token, it's, the stories are funny. George Haley Bellamy, he was pretty amazing.
Yep. John. Yep. So anyway, this is, and were you involved? Now I may have this wrong, but were you involved when they found his tools?
I was involved. Would you say involved? It was the same. The Portsmouth Historical Society, correct?
And it had something to do. Did it have anything to do with Frost? A gentleman named Frost.
Yeah, Frost. I'm trying to remember. Actually, I'd totally forgotten about that. I remember seeing his tools in the second floor of the Historical Society at the time, and saying, "Isn't this cool?"
Yeah, my dad had something to do with that years ago, and then
Yeah, I'm trying to think.
yeah,
When was that? It was in that same general time frame where I was
yeah,
wrapping up things with Brock and my thesis. It was all kind of the same time as I recall.
yeah.
That was pretty nifty. That was nifty. Yeah.
Yeah, and that just for the listener, and that's just it's a real famous John Haley Bellamy, a very famous eagle carver. Started out at the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard carving eagles there and carving other things too, you know, bowsprits and things like that, and transom boards and things. But I mean, he was just an amazing carver. Had his own style of eagle, and it became very popular. And there's all kinds of very colorful person. I did a podcast. You can check back on this podcast. I did a podcast about that carver.
Hmm.
I'm trying to remember the gentleman that put the book together.
Oh, oh,
Yes, I
oh.
just can't think of his.
No, I can't.
Yeah,
Mm.
but anyway, Jim
So
something.
there
Yeah,
was a, and he was a port. He also a number of things in Portsmouth. In fact, the Treadwell House where Ron Bourgeot used to have his
right.
auction, so his
Yeah,
old building, I believe, it's now condos. The huge reproduction Bellamy
right.
Eagle was on the front of that, if anybody remembers.
Yeah, the 12-foot eagle
They'd
or
have
whatever it was.
the banners above
Yeah,
behind the eagle's head, and saying "Live free or die" and all sorts of different
yeah,
sayings. Yeah.
yeah.
And
Great New Hampshire thing.
he also made shelves, that would have the Masonic
Oh
compass,
yeah, he made the
uh,
shelves. He made the picture
yeah,
frames that George
picture frame. Yeah.
Wasson used to paint paintings on. He made deer heads. He did
Uh,
all kinds of he did all kinds of things. I've had a bunch of them over the years.
yeah.
But well, anyway, it's been such a pleasure to talk to
Yeah.
you again.
Once again,
I don't
Martin.
know if we really made any progress here, the state of antiques today, but it's
Well, I think quickly one of the things that is a challenge is that history isn't being taught the same way it was once taught in schools. With all those standardized testing, you have math and sciences, but the arts and history, civics, they're just not taught anymore. So if they're not in the same way, with the same emphasis, because of the standardized testing and the need to for schools to rank, et cetera. So students they're not learning the history that they should be learning. And so therefore, if you're not learning something, how can you be aware of it?
hmm,
So, and it's like anything cultural, be it, museums, symphony, ballet, if you're not being exposed to it, you're not going to know,
yeah,
and therefore you're not going to care. And that is a very serious issue with
hmm,
culture in general. If you don't know, then you're not going to care. So that's why I love having school kids come in here.
yeah,
You light that spark. You never know what it is that you're going to light that spark. If they go to an
that's right.
auction, whatever it is, people need to be exposed
Yeah,
to history, to culture, because it's important. It makes us a richer person, having that. I mean, having that exposure. So that's a really really important issue that I don't have an answer for, other than figure out a way to get history back into schools and part of the curriculum, more so younger people are exposed to it. Um,
yeah,
so there is that interest. Otherwise, it's just they're going to fall into it. They're going to some one way or the other, but it's more difficult, more challenging to get younger people aware. Um,
yeah.
so that's something which I would love to see more focus on. And it
when
would
I
not.
have when I have run into like at appraisal clinics and things like that, and there's actually kids that are interested, I
Yeah.
always ask them, "Hey, how did you get interested?" And a lot of times, "Oh, I watched the
Antiques
pawn
Roadshow.
shop,
Okay.
whatever
Yeah,
it's
pawn
called,
shop. Yeah, yeah,
or American Pickers, or
yeah.
and one kid said, "I love the Antiques Roadshow." I go, "Really?" I said, "Oh, that's so awesome." I mean, so it's good that at least that's out there. That's good exposure.
It
And
is.
but I
It is.
love the hands-on. I think the hands-on is so important. I
Mhm.
mean, you think of if I never had the hands-on, I wouldn't have had interest in this. Luckily,
If I had not taken a class by John Kirk, who was a furniture historian, the impecunious furniture collector, the impecunious house collector, et cetera, house restorer, et cetera, um, I would not have known there was a field to study furniture. I would have had no idea. I was an art history major. They don't. I mean, art history classes, they really need to introduce furniture and decorative arts, because art doesn't hang on a wall by itself in space.
Right.
I mean, they're
Yeah.
usually architecture classes. They don't teach decorative art and furniture classes. And I was very fortunate. There was a program in artisanry also at BU at the time, where John was, and he taught us a 1 semester and 2 semester class on the history of furniture. And the PIA kids were there too. So I got the people making the stuff, and I got him talking about the stuff, and it just lit the spark. I was like, oh my gosh! Again, it was that exposure, that opportunity, and it changed my trajectory entirely. So that it was that again, it's about the opportunity. And so regardless of how you find it, but the more exposure to classes, or TV shows, Pawn Stars or whatever, Pawn Stars,
Yeah. Yeah.
or Pickers, American Pickers, whatever, Antiques Roadshow. They're all important.
Right. Well, thanks so much. You're such a positive thing to the antiques world. I'm glad that
and I'm
you're willing.
tangential at this point, and but still, it's about getting people involved, and families, also people of all ages, into the museum for different programs, and connecting them with how fun history is. And we have one of the most important archives in New England. It's incredible. It goes back in the 1630s, and you just go down these rabbit holes. It's so many layers. And it's just fascinating. So history is a great thing.
It really is.
I appreciate the.
I've been reading a book on Dutch Manhattan, and boy, is that really interesting. Really interesting how that all started. But anyway, thank you so much. It's a real pleasure, as always, to talk to you.
I hope to see you before another 10 years.
That's right. Okay. Take care.
All right. Thank you, Martin.